The mirror in the dressing room reflected Isabella Santos's radiant face, her brown eyes sparkling with the happiness of someone about to realize a lifelong dream. Tomorrow was the big day. Her wedding to Fabio Mendoza, the man who had won her over 3 years ago with his easy charm and light spirit. She adjusted a strand of her light brown hair and smiled at her reflection, imagining what it would feel like to walk down the aisle at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Midtown Manhattan. "Isabella, are you ready?" "The car's here!" Her mother's voice echoed down the hall of their modest apartment in the East Village, where they had lived since she was a child. It was a simple home, but full of love, so different from the world she was about to enter through marriage. She grabbed her small purse and went downstairs, feeling her stomach clench slightly. It wasn't wedding jitters, but the rehearsal dinner that would take place that night at the Mendoza family's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. It would be the first time she would be completely immersed in that world of luxury and ostentation, surrounded by Fabio's business friends and New York's high society. And above all, it would be an entire evening in the presence of Renato Mendoza. Fabio's older brother was a constant shadow that hung over her relationship. At 37, Renato ran a construction and design empire that spanned the country, transforming urban landscapes with his bold projects. Isabella had met him only 3 times in 3 years of dating, and each time she felt diminished by his penetrating gaze and his few words, heavy with silent judgment. The first time, during a family dinner, he barely spoke to her, limiting himself to observing her with those dark gray eyes that seemed to dissect every gesture, every word. The second time, at Fabio's birthday party, he made polite but cold comments about her profession as an elementary school teacher, as if it was something lesser, insignificant. The third time, just 2 months ago during their engagement luncheon, his only words to her were, "I hope you make my brother happy," said in a tone that sounded more like a veiled threat than a blessing. Fabio always defended his brother, saying that Renato was just protective and that he had enormous responsibilities that made him seem distant. But Isabella saw beyond the excuses. Renato Mendoza considered her unworthy of being part of the family. A public school teacher, the daughter of a carpenter and a seamstress, was not up to the Mendoza's standards. The car glided through the streets of Manhattan until it reached the gated community in Greenwich. The Mendoza estate stood imposing, with its impeccable gardens and modern architecture that screamed sophistication. Isabella took a deep breath as she got out of the car, smoothing the navy blue dress she had carefully chosen. Elegant, but not too flashy. The party was already in full swing when she and Fabio arrived. The main hall was filled with guests in formal attire, champagne flutes circulating among lively conversations about business, international travel, and investments. Isabella smiled and greeted politely, feeling like an actress playing a role for which she hadn't completely memorized the script. That's when she saw him. Renato was near the French windows overlooking the garden, talking to a group of men in suits. Even from a distance, his presence was magnetic and intimidating. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair styled with precision, he exuded a natural authority that made everyone around him pay attention when he spoke. Isabella noticed how he gestured discreetly, his movements controlled and precise, never showing excessive emotion. Their eyes met across the hall for a brief moment. Renato nodded almost imperceptibly in her direction, a formal, distant greeting, before returning to his conversation as if she were just another guest. The evening passed with introductions, toasts, and speeches. Isabella did her best to stay close to Fabio and the friends she already knew, avoiding crossing paths with her intimidating brother-in-law. But it was impossible not to notice his constant presence in the periphery of her vision, watching everything with those analytical eyes, like a predator studying his territory. It was during dinner that everything changed. Isabella had gone out to the terrace in search of a moment of fresh air, away from the stifling heat of the hall and the conversations about subjects she didn't understand. The night was clear, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the garden flowers. She leaned against the marble railing, contemplating the city lights that stretched across the horizon. The sound of footsteps made her turn around. Renato approached, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing her one of the glasses. His voice was deep, controlled, but there was something different in his tone, a softness she had never noticed before. "Thank you." Isabella accepted the drink, her hands briefly brushing his. "I really needed some air. Parties like this can be overwhelming for those who aren't used to them," he commented, positioning himself next to her on the railing, but maintaining a respectful distance. Isabella glanced at him, surprised by the observation that sounded almost understanding. "You seem to know the feeling well," she ventured. An almost imperceptible smile touched Renato's lips. "More than you imagine." Before she could answer, shouts from the hall shattered the tranquility of the night. They both turned, alarmed, seeing people running towards the center of the room. Among the confused screams, one word stood out with terrible clarity: Fabio. Mina, Renato, and Isabella ran towards the hall, where they found a circle of guests around Fabio, who was sitting in a chair, breathing irregularly and with a pale face. His hands trembled visibly as he tried to loosen his tie. "What happened?" Isabella knelt beside her fiancé, her hands touching his face gently. I don't know," Fabio murmured, his voice weak. "Suddenly, everything started spinning. My chest felt tight. It's an anxiety attack," Renato diagnosed with clinical calm, dismissing the onlookers with a firm gesture. "Everyone, please give him some space." Someone called Dr. Evans. "He should be here," while Isabella whispered words of comfort to Fabio. Stroking his hair maternally, Renato took control of the situation with impressive efficiency. Within minutes, the family doctor arrived. The guests were discreetly redirected to another room, and Fabio was taken to one of the bedrooms in the estate to recover. "He'll be fine," Dr. Evans assured Isabella in the hallway. "It was just an anxiety attack, probably from the stress of the wedding. I gave him a mild sedative. He'll sleep until tomorrow." Isabella nodded, but her hands were still shaking. "Can I stay with him?" "It's better to let him rest. The presence of other people can worsen the anxiety when he wakes up," the doctor explained gently. When they were alone in the hallway, Renato approached her. "Come on, I'll have someone drive you home." "No." The answer came out firmer than Isabella expected. "I want to make sure he's okay. Can I stay here tonight? Is there a guest room?" Renato studied her for a long moment, his dark grey eyes seeming to read beyond her words. "Of course, but the party isn't over and you're the bride-to-be. The guests will want to know how he is." "I don't know if I can—" "Yes, you can." His voice had a certainty that she didn't feel in herself. "You're stronger than you think." The observation caught her off guard. Coming from anyone else, it would sound like a comforting cliché. But coming from Renato Mendoza, the man who had always treated her with distant coldness, it sounded like genuine recognition. They returned to the hall, where Renato discreetly announced that Fabio was recovering well and that the party should continue. Isabella was surprised by his ability to reassure the guests without revealing intimate details, keeping Fabio's dignity intact. For the next 2 hours, she found herself observing Renato from a completely new perspective. He circulated among the groups with ease, always knowing exactly what to say, when to smile, how to conduct delicate conversations about business or politics. But what impressed her the most was how he subtly redirected any malicious or curious comments about Fabio, protecting his brother even in his absence. "He's always been like this," commented Marina, a cousin of Fabio who approached her. "Renato has been carrying the world on his shoulders since he was 20, when our parents died in the accident. Fabio was only 18, he was in college. Renato took over everything. The company, the responsibilities, even raising Fabio." Isabella felt something stir in her chest, an uncomfortable understanding. "I didn't know." "Few do. Renato doesn't talk about it. But he sacrificed a lot to keep everything running. He's had a few serious girlfriends, but it always ended. He said he didn't have time for relationships. Marina smiled sadly. I think he gave up on finding someone who understood his priorities. When the party finally ended and the last guest said goodbye, Isabella found herself alone with Renato in the silent hall. The staff had begun to collect glasses and plates, the discreet movement creating background noise as they stood, suddenly unsure what to say to each other. The guest room is upstairs, third door on the left, Renato said finally. There are clean clothes in the closet if you need them. Thank you, Isabella hesitated. For everything, I mean. For the way you handled the situation today. It was nothing. Yes, it was. She turned completely to him. I always thought you disapproved of me. That you thought I wasn't good enough for Fabio. Renato stood still, his face unreadable. Why did you think that? You barely talk to me. You always seem to be judging me, as if I were an intruder. A muscle tightened in his jaw. Maybe it's because I know my brother better than you think. The answer cut like a sharp blade. What do you mean by that? Fabio is complicated. He always has been. Since he was a teenager, he runs from responsibilities when the pressure increases. The anxiety attacks started in college and intensified whenever he needed to make important decisions. Are you saying he shouldn't marry me? Renato ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of frustration. I'm saying you deserve someone who doesn't panic on the eve of his own wedding. The comment echoed between them like a gunshot. Isabella felt her face flush. It's none of your business. You're right. It's not. He started to walk away, but stopped. But when you marry him, you'll become my sister-in-law. And I protect my family. From me? From disappointments. The coldness had returned to his voice, but now Isabella perceived something behind it, not arrogance, but an ironclad protection built over years of carrying responsibilities that should never have been his. Good night, Isabella. She watched him walk up the stairs, each movement controlled and elegant, even in exhaustion. When she reached the guest room, her hands were still trembling, but no longer from the scare with Fabio. It was something different, dangerous, that she didn't want to name. The room was impeccable, decorated in neutral tones, with a refined taste that screamed money without being ostentatious. Isabella changed into a nightgown she found in the closet, soft as silk, probably costing more than her monthly salary. She couldn't sleep. Renato's comments echoed in her mind, mixing with the image of him taking control of the crisis, protecting Fabio, watching her with those eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. At 3 a.m, she gave up trying to sleep and went down to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was plunged into darkness, only a few security lights illuminating the way. She found Renato sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing his dress shirt, but with his sleeves rolled up and his tie undone. There were papers spread out in front of him and an open laptop. Couldn't sleep either, she asked softly. He looked up, and for a moment she saw something unguarded in his expression before the mask returned. Work never sleeps. Isabella poured herself some water and, against her better judgment, sat down in the chair opposite him. What did you mean earlier? About protecting your family from disappointments? Renato closed the laptop slowly. Do you really want to know? I do. Then meet me tomorrow at the construction company's office, noon. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart race. There are things about Fabio that you need to know before you marry him. Things he's never told you. Isabella woke up with a heavy heart and a confused mind. The wedding was less than 24 hours away, but Renato's words echoed in her head like a disturbing mantra. Fabio was still asleep in the next room, recovering from the previous night's episode, and she didn't have the heart to wake him up to talk. She put on a simple business outfit, a white blouse and a navy blue skirt, and headed to the address Renato had sent via text. The Mendoza construction building stood imposing in Midtown Manhattan, its modern lines and glass facade reflecting the family's corporate power. The reception area was a spectacle of marble and steel, where impeccably dressed employees walked by carrying folders and tablets. When she mentioned Renato's name, she was immediately escorted by a stylish assistant to the top floor, where the president's office was located. "Mr. Mendoza will see you in a few minutes," the assistant informed her, indicating a luxurious waiting room with a panoramic view of the city. Isabella walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the frantic movement of the metropolis below. From that height, people looked like ants, and she suddenly felt small and lost amid so much grandeur. "Sorry for the wait." Renato's deep voice made her turn around. He was wearing a dark grey suit that highlighted his eyes, his hair perfectly styled, his entire presence radiating authority. There was a meeting that couldn't be postponed. "No problem." Isabella tried to sound casual, but her voice trembled slightly. Renato led her into his office, a spacious and sophisticated environment with an imposing desk, bookshelves filled with books, and architectural designs on the walls. But what caught her attention the most was a framed photograph on the desk, Renato and Fabio younger, embracing and smiling, in front of a simple house she didn't recognize. "Please, have a seat." He indicated one of the leather armchairs in front of the desk, but remained standing, his hands in his pockets. "What I'm about to tell you isn't easy to hear." Isabella's stomach tightened. "Does it have to do with other women?" "Not exactly." Renato walked to the window, turning his back to her. "Fabio has always had problems with commitments, not just romantic ones. Any situation that requires real responsibility. Everyone gets nervous before big decisions. He dropped out of college twice, quit 3 jobs without notice, called off a previous engagement a week before the wedding." The words hit Isabella like a punch to the gut. "Previous engagement?" Renato turned around, his face a mask of control. 4 years ago, Patricia was the daughter of a business partner of ours. They had been dating for 2 years. Everything seemed perfect, until Fabio simply ran away. Literally, took a plane to Europe without telling anyone and stayed there for 3 months. "Why?" Her voice came out as a whisper. Fear, panic that he wouldn't be able to be the husband she deserved. Renato sat down again, his eyes meeting hers. When he came back, he was a wreck. Patricia had moved on, obviously. Her family broke off the business deal with us. It was a difficult time. Isabella felt as if the ground were moving beneath her feet. "And you think he'll do the same to me?" "I don't know. I hope not." Renato leaned forward, his hands clasped. "But I thought you had the right to know. Why are you telling me this? If you want to protect your family, wouldn't it be better to let me marry him without knowing?" A shadow passed over his eyes. "Because you don't deserve to go through what Patricia went through. And because," he hesitated, as if fighting against his own words, "because you're different." "Different how?" Renato stood up abruptly and walked to the bookshelf, picking up a book without really looking at it. Patricia was convenient, from our social class, with the same interests, the same expectations. He paused, searching for the right words. "You're genuine, real. Fabio doesn't know the value of what he has." Isabella's heart began to beat faster. There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that she had never noticed before. "And you do?" The silence stretched between them, charged with a tension she couldn't name. Renato watched her as if he were seeing her for the first time, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her cheeks flush. "You should go back and talk to Fabio," he said finally, but his voice sounded forced. "I don't want to." The answer came out before she could censor it. "Not yet. I need to process all this." Renato nodded slowly. "Do you want me to have someone drive you home?" "Actually, Isabella stood up, suddenly taken by a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Could you show me some of your projects?" "I've always been curious about architecture." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher her true intentions. "Why?" "Because I want to understand you." The honesty of the answer surprised her. "You intrigue me, Renato, and I don't like not understanding things." An almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. "All right." The next 2 hours passed like minutes. Renato showed her plans for residential buildings, shopping centers, even a school he had designed for an underserved community. His passion for his work was evident, his eyes lighting up when he explained how each structure had been designed to serve not only a function, but to improve the lives of the people who would use it. "This was my first solo project," he said, pointing to the plan of a small housing complex. "I was 23, I had just taken over the company. Everyone said it was impossible to build quality, affordable housing with the budget available. But you did it." "Yes, and I discovered that's what really motivates me. Not the luxury buildings or the multi-million-dollar shopping centers. It's creating things that matter." Isabella watched him as he spoke, noticing how his features softened when he was talking about something he was passionate about. "Did you always want to be an architect?" "Actually, I wanted to be a history professor." The admission surprised her. "I just graduated when my parents died. Fabio was in college, completely lost. Someone needed to take over the company. And you sacrificed your dreams for him." Renato was quiet for a while, his fingers tracing the lines of one of the plans. "It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a choice. But what about your own dreams? Your own life?" "My life is my family." He looked directly at her. "It always has been." There was something painful in his voice, a resignation that made Isabella's heart clench. "What about relationships?" "Marina told me you've had serious girlfriends." "Marina talks too much." Renato closed the project folder abruptly. "It's getting late." "You should..." "Renato." She touched his arm gently. "What happened? Why did you stop trying?" He looked at her hand on his arm, and for a moment she thought he would pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his, the touch warm and firm. "Because I learned that love and responsibility aren't always compatible," he said softly. "And some people carry burdens they can't share with anyone. That's an excuse. It's a reality." But even saying that, he didn't pull his hand away. "There are things about me, about our family, that you don't understand. Things that I never..." He stopped abruptly, as if he had said more than he intended. But Isabella saw something in his eyes at that moment. A flash of pain, of a secret kept for so long that it had become a part of him. "Things that you never what?" she insisted gently. Renato finally pulled away, the magic of the moment breaking. "Nothing, forget what I said." But Isabella wouldn't forget. There was something in his expression, a carefully hidden vulnerability that awakened all her protective instincts. And for the first time, she wondered if behind all that coldness and control, there wasn't a man who needed to be saved as much as he protected others. It was almost 6 in the afternoon when Renato's phone rang. Isabella was about to leave his office, still processing everything she had discovered about Fabio and about the enigmatic man in front of her, when she saw his expression change drastically as he answered the call. "What, when?" Renato stood up abruptly, running his free hand through his hair. "Are you sure? Have you looked everywhere?" Isabella felt a shiver of apprehension run down her spine. "What's wrong?" Renato ended the call, his face pale. "Fabio's disappeared." "What do you mean, disappeared?" "The housekeeper went to take him lunch around noon. The room was empty, the clothes he wore yesterday thrown on the bed, but he wasn't anywhere." Renato was already grabbing his car keys. "No one saw him leave." Isabella's heart raced. "He may have gone somewhere to think. Maybe he needs some fresh air after yesterday's episode." "No." The certainty in Renato's voice was cutting. "I know my brother. He's running." The words hit Isabella like a slap. "Running? But the wedding is tomorrow." "That's exactly why." Renato was already walking towards the door. "Come with me." "Where to?" "Oh, to look for him. I know where he might be." They ran to the parking garage, where Renato unlocked a black BMW. The silence in the car was suffocating as he drove through the congested streets of Manhattan with controlled urgency. Isabella watched his tense profile, his jaw clenched, his fingers tight on the steering wheel. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "To our grandparents' farm upstate. It's where he always goes when he wants to hide from the world." "How long does it take to get there?" "An hour and a half if we don't hit traffic." He glanced at her quickly. "But with Friday traffic, it could be 3 hours." as if the universe were conspiring against them. They got stuck in a monumental traffic jam on the FDR drive. The car moved inches at a time, and Isabella could feel Renato's tension increasing with each passing minute. Has he really done this before? Run away from a wedding? The question came out softly, almost a whisper. He has. Renato didn't take his eyes off the traffic. With Patricia, he left the house on the morning of the wedding, saying he was going to pick up the rings he had forgotten at the jeweler. We found a note 2 hours later. What kind of note? Apologizing, saying he couldn't be the man she deserved. Renato finally looked at her, and she saw a mixture of anger and pain in his eyes. He left 300 guests waiting at the church. Isabella felt nauseous. And you think he'll do the same to me? I hope not, but... He hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. Fabio has always been afraid of disappointing people. Paradoxically, he ends up disappointing everyone by trying to avoid disappointing someone. And you always have to clean up his mess. It's my responsibility. It's your prison. The words came out harsher than she intended, but there was truth in them. Renato looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. The traffic was moving at a snail's pace, and the tension in the car became almost palpable. Renato was silent for so long that Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, laden with an old pain. Fabio wasn't in the car when our parents died because I had a fight with him. A stupid fight about him having missed a meeting at the company. He left the house angry, refused to go to the business dinner with my parents. Renato stopped talking, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. If he had been in the car, he would have died too, Isabella completed softly. Exactly, and for years he thanked me for saving his life. But I knew the truth, that my fight with him was pure chance. That if he had been there, maybe I would have lost him too. Renato took a deep breath. Since then, I promised myself that I would never put him at risk again. That I would always protect him, no matter the cost. The revelation hit Isabella like a wave. Suddenly, everything made sense. The excessive protection, the way Renato always took on the responsibilities, the guilt he carried on his shoulders. Renato, don't, he shook his head. Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. I've heard that from psychologists, from friends, from everyone. It doesn't change the fact that my brother is alive by chance, and I am responsible for keeping him that way. The traffic finally started to move, and they drove in silence along the roads leading upstate. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, creating an almost unreal atmosphere inside the car. When they arrived at the farm, a simple but well-kept property with an old house surrounded by fruit trees, it was almost dark. Fabio's car was parked at the entrance, confirming Renato's suspicions. They found him sitting on the back porch, looking at a small lake that reflected the first stars. He was still wearing the rumpled clothes from the party the night before, his hair disheveled, holding a beer. Fabio! Isabella ran to him but stopped when she saw his expression. There was a resignation in his face that scared her. You came. Fabio smiled sadly at her, then looked at his brother. I figured Renato would guess where I was. The wedding is tomorrow, Renato said in a controlled voice. The whole family, all the guests. I know. Fabio took a long sip of his beer. I can't do this, Renato. I can't marry her. The words hit Isabella like a punch to the gut. Why? Fabio looked at her with tear-filled eyes. Because I don't love you the way you deserve to be loved. And because, he looked at Renato, then back at her, because I know there's someone who truly loves you, and it would be wrong to stand between you. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella felt as if the ground were opening beneath her feet. What are you talking about? About my brother, Fabio said softly, who looks at you as if you're the only person in the world that matters. And about you, who spent 3 years trying to impress him, even though you thought he despised you. Fabio, stop! Renato ordered in a hoarse voice. No, I'm not going to stop. Fabio stood up unsteadily. Do you think I don't notice? The way you look at each other when you think no one's watching. The tension between you two at every family gathering. Isabella looked at Renato, who was as still as a statue, his face a mask of control that couldn't hide the storm in his eyes. "You're drunk," she said weakly. "I am. But I'm not blind." Fabio walked to her, took her hands. "Isabella, you're an incredible woman. You deserve to be loved by someone who would give their life for you. I like you. I admire you, but I'm not capable of that kind of love. I never have been." Renato finally moved, approaching them. "Enough, Fabio. You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do. And you know it too." Fabio released Isabella's hands and faced his brother. "How many nights have you spent awake thinking about her? How many times have you hated yourself for desiring your own brother's fiancée?" "Enough!" Renato's shout echoed in the silent night. But the damage was already done. The truth was there, raw and exposed between them, impossible to ignore. Isabella looked at Renato and saw in his eyes the confirmation of everything Fabio had said. And in that moment, with her heart beating like a war drum, she knew that it was also true for her. That somewhere between the initial coldness and the discoveries of that day, she had fallen for the wrong man, her fiancé's brother. The silence after Fabio's words was as dense as lead. Isabella felt the world spinning around her, as if she had lost her axis of gravity. Renato remained motionless, but she could see the tension radiating from every muscle in his body, the internal struggle he was waging with himself. "Aren't you going to say anything?" Fabio laughed bitterly. "At least have the decency to admit the truth." "The truth," said Renato in a dangerously low voice, "is that you're a coward." "As always. Maybe I am, but at least I'm not a liar." Fabio approached his brother. "How long have you been in love with her, Renato? Since the first dinner? Since the engagement? Or was it before that?" Isabella saw Renato clench his fists. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do. Remember that Christmas party 2 years ago? You disappeared when I brought Isabella. Marina commented that you had left suddenly for an urgent meeting." Fabio smiled without humor. "What meeting happens on Christmas Eve, Renato?" "Stop." Renato's voice was laden with a barely contained threat. "And on my birthday, when you practically ran from the room when she arrived? Or at the company party, when you kept asking me if I was sure about the wedding?" "Fabio." But Fabio didn't stop. He turned to Isabella, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "And you, Isabella, why did you always ask about him? Why did you get tense every time I mentioned that he would travel or go out with some woman? Did you think I didn't notice how you got when he was around?" Isabella felt tears burning her eyes. "I didn't. I never. You two spent 3 years torturing yourselves, and I was too much of an idiot to realize that I was in the middle of something I should never have tried to prevent." Fabio threw the empty bottle into the lake, the sound echoing in the night. "At least now I can do the right thing." "The right thing would be for you to take responsibility," said Renato, but his voice sounded hollow. "No, the right thing is to get out of the way." Before either of them could respond, the sound of tires on the dirt road made them turn around. Headlights cut through the darkness, approaching the house. A black car stopped behind Renato's BMW, and 3 people got out. Marina, Dr. Evans, and a woman Isabella didn't recognize. "Thank God you're all here," said Marina, breathless. "We need to talk. Urgent. Marina, this isn't a good time." Renato began, but she interrupted him. "It's about Patricia Almeida. She's back in the States." The name hit the group like lightning. Isabella saw Fabio's face turn even paler, if that were possible. "The ex-fiancé," she murmured. "Ex-fiancé who became a very successful investigative journalist in London," said the unknown woman, approaching. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Claudia Mendes, the family's publicist. And we have a serious problem." Dr. Evans, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Patricia arrived in the States yesterday. She's already contacted 3 different news outlets." "For what?" asked Renato, his voice cutting. "To tell her side of the story about the cancelled wedding. And more." Claudia opened a folder she was carrying. "She has photos." "What kind of photos?" Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. Claudia held out some printed photographs. Even in the dim light of the porch, it was possible to see clearly. Renato and Isabella on the terrace of the estate the night before, him offering her the champagne, the two of them running together when Fabio got sick. A particularly compromising image of Renato touching Isabella's face during the conversation. In the office, seen through the window. "Oh my God," whispered Isabella. "There's more," continued Claudia relentlessly. "Photos of you two arriving at the construction company building together today. You leaving together, Renato touching your hand." "She followed you," said Marina, her voice filled with concern. "Patricia hired a private investigator." Renato took the photos, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. "What does she want?" "Revenge," replied Dr. Evans. "She never got over the humiliation, and now she sees a perfect opportunity to get even." "Get even for what?" asked Fabio, who had approached to see the photos. Claudia took a deep breath. "She's going to publish an article tomorrow, on your wedding day, suggesting that there's been an affair between Renato and Isabella for years. That it's a pattern for the Mendoza men to get involved with each other's fiancés. That Renato deliberately sabotaged her relationship with Fabio because he wanted Isabella for himself." "That's absurd," said Isabella, but her voice came out weakly. "The photos don't lie," retorted Claudia. "And considering the family's reputation, the company, the business deals, this could be devastating." "There's something else," added Marina hesitantly. "She found out about Fabio's anxiety attacks. She has medical records, prescriptions. She's going to insinuate that he's mentally unstable." "How did she get that?" Renato roared. "Money opens a lot of doors," said Dr. Evans sadly, "and she has a lot of money now." Isabella sat down heavily, in a chair, the reality of the situation hitting her like an avalanche. "What happens if she publishes this? Your reputation will be destroyed," said Claudia bluntly. "Renato's too. The company could lose important contracts. And Fabio." She looked at the younger man. "Will be seen as a weak man who can't even keep his own fiancée." "What about the wedding?" asked Isabella with a choked voice. "If it happens tomorrow, it will be seen as a farce to cover up the scandal. If it's cancelled, it will be seen as confirmation that everything is true." Renato began to pace back and forth, his brain clearly processing options. "What does she want in order not to publish?" "Oh, you're not going to like it," said Claudia. "She wants Fabio to make a public statement apologizing for the humiliation he put her through. She wants Renato to resign as president of the company." And she hesitated. "She wants you two never to see each other again. She has a contract ready, demanding that Isabella move to another state and never have contact with the Mendoza family again." "She can demand that?" asked Isabella, incredulous. "She can demand whatever she wants. The question is whether you'll accept it." Silence returned, but now it was different. It was the silence of people trapped in a cage with no apparent way out. "How much time do we have?" asked Renato finally. "The story will air tomorrow at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before the wedding time," replied Claudia, "unless she receives a response to her demands by midnight tonight." Renato looked at his watch. It was almost 9 at night. 3 hours, he murmured. "To decide the rest of our lives," added Isabella bitterly. Fabio, who had remained surprisingly calm throughout the revelation, finally spoke. "Or to find a way to destroy her before she destroys us." Everyone turned to him, surprised by the coldness in his voice. "What?" asked Marina. A dangerous smile spread across Fabio's face. "Patricia Almeida isn't the only one with secrets, and she forgot one important thing. I know hers too." "What secrets?" asked Renato, a spark of hope in his eyes. Fabio approached the group, his posture changing completely. The drunken vulnerability had disappeared, replaced by a cold determination that Isabella had never seen in him before. Patricia wasn't exactly the innocent, abandoned bride that she paints to the media, he said, grabbing his cell phone. She was having an affair for months before our wedding. With whom? Asked Marina, stepping closer. With her father's business partner, a married man, 30 years older. Fabio started fiddling with his phone. She thought I didn't know, but I had a detective following her for weeks before I ran away. Claudia frowned. Why didn't you ever tell anyone this? Because at the time, I was relieved to have an excuse not to get married. And later, well, letting her carry the image of victim was easier than exposing the truth. Renato approached his brother. Do you have proof? I have photos, videos, hotel records, everything filed with my lawyer 4 years ago. Fabio showed the cell phone screen. I'm calling him now. For a few precious minutes, hope bloomed in the group. Maybe there was a way out, a way to reverse Patricia's blackmail. But then, Claudia's phone rang, and the tone of the conversation that followed made everyone's blood run cold. I understand, yes. Thank you for letting me know. She hung up with a pale face. Change of plans. What? Asked Renato. Patricia isn't going to wait until midnight. The story will air in 1 hour at 10 o'clock tonight on a celebrity gossip TV show, live. The world seemed to stop. Dr. Evans was the first to break the silence. She found out you know her secrets. Someone leaked. Impossible, said Fabio. Only me and my lawyer knew. What about the detective you hired back then? Suggested Marina. Does he still have the information? Fabio's face paled. He died 2 years ago. Heart attack. And the files? We're with him. My lawyer only has copies of the less compromising photos. Claudia checked her phone again. Worse yet, she's not alone. She got an exclusive interview with Robert Almeida. Who's Robert Almeida? Asked Isabella. The partner Patricia was having the affair with, explained Renato gravely. He's going to be on the show, as a witness in her favor. He's going to say that she never had an affair, that she was always faithful to Fabio, and that the evidence you have is a fabrication created by the Mendoza family to defame her. He's lying to protect his own reputation, said Fabio desperately. But who's going to believe you against his word? Retorted Claudia. Robert Almeida has been respected in the business world for decades, and you, well, the photos speak for themselves. Marina approached Renato. We need to do something, now. Like what? Go on television and deny everything? Renato ran his hands through his hair. The photos are real. We can't deny that there were moments between us. Moments? Fabio laughed bitterly. Renato, you've been in love with her for 3 years, and she with you. Those aren't moments. It's a passion you've suffocated because of me. This isn't helping, murmured Isabella. Claudia's phone rang again. This time, when she answered, everyone could hear the agitated voice on the other end of the line. The publicist grew paler and paler as the conversation progressed. I understand. Yes, I'll let them know. She hung up and turned to the group. It was my contact at the TV station. Patricia has more cards up her sleeve. What cards? Asked Renato in a dangerously low voice. She got a recording. The air seemed to leave everyone's lungs simultaneously. What kind of recording? Whispered Isabella. Of your conversation in the office today, when Renato told you about Fabio's previous engagement, when he talked about protecting the family. Claudia paused painfully. And when he said that you were different, that Fabio didn't know the value of what he had. Renato stood as still as stone. How did she get that? Directional microphone, probably. She had all day to plan. Claudia put away her phone. You have 40 minutes before all of this is broadcast to millions of people. Isabella felt her legs weaken. My family is going to see this. My students, my co-workers. My company is going to lose million-dollar contracts, added Renato. Fabio will be exposed as mentally unstable on national television. And you two will never be able to be together without it being seen as confirmation that everything is true, concluded Marina. The silence that followed was absolute. There was no way out. Any move they made would be interpreted as guilt. Any denial would be seen as a lie. There is a solution, said Dr. Evans finally. Everyone turned to him. Isabella needs to leave now, leave the city, the state. Never have contact with the Mendoza family again. He looked directly at her. If you simply disappear before the show airs, it may be presented as a flight from guilt, but at least you'll be away from the immediate consequences. And abandon everyone I love. Isabella shook her head. My family, my friends, my career. It's better than destroying everyone's life, said Renato in a dead voice. He's right. You need to get away from us. Renato, no. Yes! His outburst made everyone recoil. This is all my fault. I should have kept my distance from day one. I should have been stronger. He turned to her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. You deserved a normal, simple, happy life. Not this mess. You think I care about that? Oh, you should care. Renato approached her, grabbing her shoulders. Look around you, Isabella. Look at what my feelings have caused. Your reputation is going to be destroyed. Your career ruined. Your family humiliated. All because I couldn't, his voice broke, because I couldn't stop loving you. The words hung in the air like a final and desperate confession. Renato, she whispered, touching his face. Don't, he pulled away sharply. Don't make this harder than it already is. He turned to Claudia. Make the arrangements. A car, money, documents. She needs to be far away from here in half an hour. Where to? Asked Claudia. It doesn't matter. The farther, the better. Isabella felt like she was watching her own life crumble in slow motion. What if I refuse to go? Then I'll leave, said Renato with a finality that cut like a blade. I'll leave the company, the family, everything. Because I can't keep causing destruction in the lives of the people I love. You're being too dramatic, tried Marina. Maybe we can... No! Renato turned to his cousin. Enough with the maybes, enough with the hopes. It's over. He looked at Isabella one last time, and she saw the absolute pain in his eyes. Go, Isabella, forget me. All of us. I love you, she whispered, the tears finally falling. I love you too, he replied, his voice broken. That's exactly why you need to go. 30 minutes later, Isabella was in the back seat of a car, headed to the airport, a ticket to Los Angeles in her pocket, and her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. On the radio, the voice of the gossip show host announced, and now, an explosive story about the Mendoza family and a love triangle that will shake New York high society. She turned off the radio and cried in the dark, as New York disappeared through the back window, taking with it the only chance of happiness she had known. 3 weeks had passed since Isabella had arrived in Los Angeles. She was staying in a simple motel in Santa Monica, far enough away not to be recognized, but close enough to follow the news that continued to bombard her through the internet. The television show had been devastating. The images of her and Renato, the recording of their conversations, all orchestrated to paint the perfect picture of a forbidden passion that had destroyed a family. Patricia had appeared as the eloquent victim, the woman who had been betrayed twice by the Mendoza brothers. The New York newspapers had reveled in the scandal. The empire of forbidden love, the curse of the Mendozas, teacher seduces two brothers. The headlines became increasingly sensationalistic. Renato's company had lost 3 important contracts, and he had temporarily stepped down from the presidency, according to the news. Isabella didn't know how Renato was coping with it all, and that ignorance consumed her more than her own pain. It was on the morning of a rainy Tuesday that everything changed. She was having coffee at a small bakery in downtown Santa Monica when an elegant woman, about 50 years old, approached her table. Isabella Santos? Asked the stranger with a slightly different accent. Isabella tensed, preparing to run. Who wants to know? Yeah, my name is Helen Carter. I'm an investigative journalist from Washington, D.C. The woman sat down without being invited. And I think you're being manipulated. I don't know what you're talking about. I know you have no reason to trust me, but you need to hear me out. Helen opened a folder. I've been investigating Patricia Almeida for 2 years, long before this whole scandal with your family. Despite herself, Isabella felt a spark of curiosity. Why? Because she's done this before. 4 times. Isabella's heart stopped. What do you mean? Patricia Almeida has a pattern. She gets involved with wealthy men, collects compromising information about them and their families, and then uses that information for extortion or revenge. Helen spread documents on the table. London, New York, Paris, always the same story. Isabella picked up one of the documents. It was a newspaper article about a scandal involving an oil tycoon and his niece. This doesn't prove anything about me and the Mendozas. No, but this does. Helen pulled out a digital recording. A conversation I got from a source in London. Patricia talking to her lawyer about the plan to destroy the Mendoza family. With trembling hands, Isabella took the headphones that Helen offered. Patricia's voice, unmistakable, echoed in her ears. No, Marcus, you don't understand. It's not just about money this time. It's personal. Renato Mendoza humiliated me publicly when he called off my wedding to his idiot brother. Now I'm going to destroy everything he loves. And how do you intend to do that? Fabio's fiancée is clearly in love with Renato. Any idiot can see that. I'm going to use that passion against them. A little manipulation, some well-taken photos, and voila, public scandal. And if it doesn't work, it will. I've studied this family for 4 years. I know exactly where to attack to cause the maximum damage. Isabella took off the headphones with trembling hands. Where did you get this? Her lawyer in London. He had a fit of conscience when he realized that Patricia was destroying innocent people. Helen put away the recording. But that's not all. There's more, much more. Patricia didn't act alone. She has a partner in the States, someone who's helping her with inside information about your family. Who? Helen hesitated. You may not like hearing this. Tell me. Robert Almeida? He's not just the man who testified in her favor on TV. He's her partner in the extortion schemes. And more. She took a deep breath. He's Patricia's father. Isabella's world spun. What? Patricia Almeida isn't a regular journalist who took revenge on a family that humiliated her. She's the daughter of Robert Almeida, who lost million-dollar contracts to Mendoza Construction in the last 5 years. This is all a corporate revenge disguised as personal drama. Isabella stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth in the small bakery. Why are you telling me this? Because I believe innocent people shouldn't pay for the crimes of others. And because, Helen smiled sadly, because I used to be Patricia once. I used my profession to destroy people who hurt me. I know what it's like to carry that weight on your conscience. What do you want from me? That you fight. That you go back to New York and confront this lie. Helen stood up. I have all the evidence needed to expose Patricia and Robert. But I need you to make it believable. They'll say it's all a setup by me and Renato. Not if you're not with him when the truth comes out. Helen picked up the folder. I need 48 hours to organize everything. Can you meet me in New York on Thursday? Isabella looked out the bakery window, watching the rain fall on the historic streets of Santa Monica. For 3 weeks she had hidden, she had cried, she had accepted the role of villain that had been imposed on her. But now... Where? The Plaza Hotel at 9 o'clock at night. The presidential suite, Helen smiled. Oh, and Isabella, don't contact anyone from the Mendoza family. If they know you're coming back, Patricia might find out and disappear before we can expose her. When Helen left, Isabella remained seated for more than an hour, processing everything she had discovered. Anger began to grow in her chest, not only against Patricia and Robert, but against herself for having fled, for having allowed them to destroy her life without a fight. That night, she packed her bags for the first time in 3 weeks. On the flight back to New York, she bought all the available newspapers, studying each article about the Mendoza scandal. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a woman about to reclaim her life. When the plane landed at LaGuardia Airport, Isabella Santos was no longer the frightened teacher who had fled New York. She was a woman with a mission, armed with the truth and determined to use it. But first, she needed allies, and she knew exactly where to start. Marina Mendoza had been the only person in the family who had tried to defend her publicly after the scandal. Maybe it was time to accept that alliance. In the taxi that was taking her to Midtown Manhattan, Isabella typed a careful message to Renato's cousin. "I need your help. I have information that can change everything. Can you meet me today at 7? Don't tell anyone, especially Renato." "Not yet." The answer came in 2 minutes. "Where have you been?" "Of course I'll help you." "Tell me where." Isabella smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. The war was far from over, but now she had the right weapons. And this time she wouldn't run. The meeting with Marina at the discreet cafe in Greenwich Village was tense and emotional. Renato's cousin had visibly lost weight in recent weeks, carrying the weight of the scandal that had hit the entire family. "Isabella, my God, where have you been?" Marina hugged her tightly. He's destroyed. He doesn't leave the house, he doesn't talk to anyone. The company is practically paralyzed. How's Fabio? Better, actually. Bizarrely, all this chaos has made him mature. He's taking on more responsibilities, trying to help Renato. Marina held Isabella's hands. "But tell me, what is this information that can change everything?" Isabella told her everything about Helen, the recordings, the discovery that Patricia and Robert were father and daughter, the extortion scheme. Marina listened in growing silence, her eyes widening at each revelation. "My God," whispered Marina when Isabella finished. "We need to tell Renato immediately." "No, not yet." Isabella shook her head. "Helen has a plan. Patricia is giving a live interview tomorrow on the Today Show, where she's going to reveal more details about the scandal. It's our opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "To confront her live on television with the evidence. Helen has already talked to the show's producer. They would love a dramatic twist." Marina turned pale. "That's risky, Isabella. What if it goes wrong?" "Then at least we'll have tried." Isabella leaned forward. "Marina, I love your cousin. I'd love him in a way I never imagined possible. And I won't let a liar destroy our chance of happiness." The next morning at 8 o'clock, Isabella was at the NBC studios, hidden in the production room with Helen and Marina. On the monitor screen, they could see Patricia on stage, elegant in a navy blue dress, talking animatedly with host Savannah Guthrie about the dangers of unrequited love obsessions. "She's painting herself as a victim again," murmured Helen, adjusting her headphones, talking about how she had to leave the country for fear of the Mendoza family's revenge. "It's now," said the producer, a young man named David who had been enchanted by the possibility of a journalistic scoop. "You go on in the next segment." Isabella took a deep breath, smoothing the white dress she had carefully chosen, the color of innocence, of truth. Helen was beside her, professional and confident, with a folder full of evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Savannah Guthrie after the commercial break, "we have a surprise for you. People who claim to have crucial information about this case have just arrived at our studios. Please welcome investigative journalist Helen Carter and Isabella Santos." Patricia's face lost all color when she saw Isabella enter the stage. For a moment, her mask of composure faltered, revealing the shock and anger in her eyes. "Isabella," said Savannah, indicating a chair, "you disappeared 3 weeks ago. Why?" "Because I was manipulated into believing that I was guilty of something I never did," replied Isabella, her voice firm despite her nerves. "But now I've discovered the truth." "What truth?" Patricia quickly regained her composure. "The truth is that you destroyed my family, my relationship." "The truth," interrupted Helen, "is that you never had a real relationship with Fabio Mendoza. You used him to get close to the family and collect information for an extortion scheme." "That's ridiculous." Helen activated a tablet, connected to the studio sound system. Patricia's voice echoed clearly. "It's not just about money this time. It's personal. Renato Mendoza humiliated me publicly. The silence in the studio was absolute. Patricia was as pale as paper. This recording, continued Helen, was made in London 2 months ago during a conversation with your lawyer Marcus Sheffield. We have the full recording, where you describe in detail how you planned to manipulate Isabella and Renato. That could have been edited. We also have this. Helen showed documents on the screen. Bank records showing regular transfers between you and Robert Almeida in the last 5 years. Interesting, considering you've denied any personal relationship. Savannah leaned forward. Robert Almeida is the businessman who testified in Mrs. Almeida's favor? He's also her father, said Isabella calmly, and one of the biggest competitors of Mendoza Construction. The bomb exploded in the studio. Patricia stood up abruptly, but Helen continued relentlessly. We have evidence of 4 similar schemes that Mrs. Almeida has executed in other countries. Always the same pattern. Seduce wealthy men, collect compromising information, use it for extortion or corporate revenge. Enough, shouted Patricia. You can't prove anything. We can prove everything, said a familiar voice. Everyone turned. Renato Mendoza was entering the studio, followed by Fabio and 2 men in suits, clearly lawyers. Renato, whispered Isabella, seeing him for the first time in 3 weeks. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, but his eyes gleamed with an iron determination. I apologize for the interruption, he said to the host, but my family has some things to clarify. Fabio approached the microphone. Patricia, you forgot one thing. I knew about your relationship with Robert Almeida 4 years ago, and I kept all the evidence. Impossible, she murmured. You said that I didn't have the evidence anymore. I lied. Fabio smiled sadly. I learned from my brother to always have a backup plan. Renato approached Patricia, his voice low but audible through the studio microphones. You wanted to destroy me. Congratulations. You managed to show me what really matters. He turned to Isabella, and she saw tears in his eyes. I spent 3 weeks hating myself for having ruined your life, believing that you would be happier away from me, away from our complicated family. He took a step towards her. But Marina called me last night and told me about your plan, and I realized that you were doing what I should have done from the beginning. What? Isabella whispered. Fight! He extended his hand to her. For us, for the truth, for love. Isabella stood up slowly, the entire studio in absolute silence. Renato, I love you, he said, his voice echoing through the studio. I've loved you for 3 years, since the first day I saw you. And I'm an idiot for having taken so long to admit it. I love you too, she replied, taking his hand. And I'm never running away again. Oh, for the love of God, exploded Patricia, but her voice was lost in the chaos that followed. The lawyers approached her with documents, the studio security escorted her out, and Savannah Guthrie tried to maintain some control over the most dramatic show of her career. But Isabella and Renato only had eyes for each other. In the midst of all that chaos, they kissed for the first time, a kiss that made up for 3 years of waiting, of misunderstandings, of denied love. You know you just did that on national television, right? Commented Fabio, smiling. Screw it, murmured Renato against Isabella's lips. Let the whole country know that I love this woman. 6 months later, St. Patrick's Cathedral was decorated exactly as Isabella had dreamed. But this time, it was Renato who was waiting for her at the altar, his eyes shining with emotion when he saw her walk towards him. Bilbio, who had insisted on being the best man, whispered to his brother as Isabella approached. This time, it's forever. This time, agreed Renato, taking Isabella's hands. It's the right man with the right woman, at the right time. And when they kissed as husband and wife, sealing a love that had survived scandals, lies, and separation, the entire congregation knew that they were witnessing something special. Patricia Almeida had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for extortion and defamation. Roberto Almeida had lost his company and his reputation. But the Mendoza family had emerged stronger, more united, and with a new member who brought not only love, but courage and determination. At the party that followed, Marina toasted the newlyweds to love that wins all battles, especially those worth fighting for. And as Renato and Isabella danced their first dance as husband and wife, they both knew that some love stories need to go through the fire to become eternal. Theirs had not only survived, it had become a legend,